My millionaire husband offered my secretary $100,000 for one night, but he didn't know it was a trap. I was sitting in the darkest corner of the suite at the Plaza Hotel, my phone trembling slightly in my hands as I held it steady, recording everything. The sound of a key card sliding into the lock made my heart stop. The door opened and Daniel walked in, his back to me, completely oblivious to my presence in the shadows. He smiled at Irina, that confident, predatory smile I had seen 1,000 times, but never truly understood until now. He closed the door behind him, and his first words cut through the silence like a blade. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, and don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now let's continue. 6 months earlier, my life looked perfect from the outside. I was Layla Morrison, Vice President of Morrison Tech Solutions, a software development company my father had built from nothing in a small garage in Brooklyn 30 years ago. When he passed away 4 years ago, he left me 50% of the company. The other 50% went to Daniel Brooks, the man my father had mentored and trusted like a son. Daniel had been the ambitious junior developer who caught my father's eye 10 years ago. Brilliant, charismatic, hungry for success. My father saw something special in him. So did I. We got married 8 years ago in a ceremony at the Pierre Hotel, surrounded by Manhattan's tech elite. I wore Vera Wang. Daniel wore confidence like a second skin. Everyone said we were the perfect power couple. Our home in Connecticut was something out of Architectural Digest. 8 bedrooms, a pool, manicured gardens that required a full-time staff. We had a summer house in the Hamptons and took ski trips to Aspen every winter. Daniel drove a Porsche. I had a Mercedes SUV I barely used because I preferred being driven. But somewhere along the way, the fairy tales started cracking. It was subtle at first. The way Daniel started making major company decisions without consulting me, even though we were equal partners on paper. The way he introduced himself as the CEO at networking events while I stood beside him, my title of vice president feeling smaller and smaller. The way our bedroom grew cold. Conversations became transactional, and intimacy became a scheduled obligation. 2 years ago, something shifted in him. He became obsessed with status, with being seen as a self-made billionaire, even though half of everything he had came from my father's legacy. He started staying later at the office, traveling more for conferences I was never invited to, coming home smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't mine. I never said anything. I told myself I was being paranoid, that successful marriages required trust, that love meant giving space. I was wrong. It was 4 months ago when I first met Irina Volkov. She walked into my office for a job interview, and I immediately noticed something in her eyes, a combination of desperation and dignity that struck me. She was 28, had just arrived from Ukraine 3 months prior, and was completely alone in the United States. Her resume was impressive. She had worked as an executive assistant for a tech firm in Kiev, but her current situation was dire. She was sleeping on a friend's couch in Queens, working night shifts at a diner in Manhattan, barely making rent. Her hands shook slightly as she handed me her references. She spoke about needing stability, about wanting to rebuild her life, about being grateful for any opportunity. Something in her vulnerability reminded me of myself years ago, before the money, before the mansion, when I was just my father's daughter trying to prove I belonged in the business world. I hired her on the spot as executive secretary. The position reported directly to both Daniel and me, handling scheduling, correspondence, and board meeting preparations. She started the following Monday. Irina was exceptional at her job. Organized, efficient, professional. She dressed conservatively, always modest blouses and knee-length skirts, minimal makeup, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was beautiful in an understated way, with high cheekbones and striking green eyes, but she seemed to deliberately downplay her appearance. For the first month, everything was normal. She integrated seamlessly into the office, learned our systems quickly, and never complained about the long hours. Daniel barely acknowledged her existence beyond basic work instructions. Then something changed. It started 3 months ago. I began noticing small things. The way Daniel would linger near Irina's desk, making small talk about her weekend plans. How he suddenly started complimenting the office coffee, which Irina prepared every morning. The way his emails to her became more frequent, often sent late at night, usually about minor issues that could have waited until morning. One Tuesday, I walked past Irina's desk and saw a bouquet of white orchids, expensive ones from that boutique florist on Madison Avenue. When I asked her who sent them, she smiled nervously and said they were from a secret admirer, but her eyes didn't meet mine. That same week, I noticed a box of Belgian chocolates on her desk, then a coffee table book about European architecture. Small gifts that seemed innocent enough individually, but together formed a pattern. I started watching more closely. Daniel began dressing differently on days he knew Irina would be in the office. Better cologne, nicer ties, that watch I had given him for our anniversary that he usually saved for client meetings. He started volunteering to stay late on nights when Irina was finishing projects, offering to help her even though she clearly didn't need assistance with basic administrative tasks. The way he looked at her made my stomach turn. It was the same way he used to look at me back when we were first dating, before the wedding, before the mansion, before everything became about appearances and acquisitions. I confronted him on a Thursday night. We were in our bedroom, getting ready for bed, and I finally found the courage to say what had been eating at me for weeks. I told him I had noticed his behavior around Irina, the gifts, the late night emails, the attention. He turned to me with such genuine looking confusion that for a moment I doubted myself. He asked if I was serious, if I was really going to start this again. His voice had that edge of disappointment, like I was a child who had misbehaved. Again, that word cut deep. Because this wasn't the first time. 3 years ago, I had found text messages on his phone. Flirtatious exchanges with a client named Rebecca. Messages about dinner meetings that never appeared on his calendar. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. When I confronted him then, he had looked at me with the same expression he wore now. Hurt, betrayed, that I would accuse him of something so terrible. He had convinced me I was imagining things, that Rebecca was just a friend, that the messages were taken out of context. He suggested couples therapy, which we attended for 6 months. The therapist, his choice of therapist, gently suggested that my trust issues stemmed from childhood abandonment issues after my mother left when I was 12, that I was projecting my fears onto Daniel, that I needed to work on my insecurity. I had believed them. I had apologized to Daniel for doubting him. I had spent a year in individual therapy trying to fix my paranoia problem. Now, standing in our bedroom, he was using the same playbook. He told me I was being paranoid again, that Irina was just an employee, that the gifts were innocent gestures to make a new immigrant feel welcome, that I was seeing threats where none existed. He asked if I wanted to destroy another 3 years with my insecurity, if I wanted to push him away with my constant suspicion, if I was really going to let my issues ruin our marriage. I went quiet. I apologized. I hated myself for it, but I did. But this time, something was different. This time, I didn't fully believe him. This time, the wound from 3 years ago had never really healed, and I could feel it reopening, raw and bleeding. I started carrying that doubt like a stone in my chest. Every morning when I saw them interact in the office, every time his phone buzzed and he turned away to read it, every night when he came home later than necessary. The worst part wasn't even the suspicion, it was the loneliness. The crushing isolation of not being able to trust my own perception of reality, of wondering if I was crazy, if I was the problem, if my jealousy was going to be the thing that destroyed us. I had no proof, just a gut feeling, just the way he looked at her, just the pattern I recognized because I had seen it before. And I was terrified I was wrong. Even more terrified, I was right. Meanwhile, I didn't know what Irina was experiencing. I couldn't see the nightmare that was unfolding for her behind her professional smile. It had started small for her, too. Daniel asking about her adjustment to American life, offering advice about neighborhoods, restaurants, places to visit. It seemed kind at first, almost paternal. She was grateful. She needed guidance, needed someone who understood the city. But then the questions became more personal. He wanted to know if she was dating anyone, if she missed having a man take care of her, if she found American men attractive. The questions came during moments when they were alone, in the elevator, in the copy room, when I was out of the office. Then came the touches, a hand on her shoulder that lingered too long, his fingers brushing hers when he handed her documents, standing too close behind her when she was at the printer, his breath on her neck as he reached over her shoulder to grab paper. Irina started dressing even more conservatively, longer skirts, higher necklines. She stopped wearing her hair down. She began timing her lunch breaks to avoid being in the office when he was around. She took the stairs instead of the elevator to reduce the chance of being alone with him. But she was trapped, and she knew it. This job was her lifeline. She was on a work visa that depended on employment. She had no family in the country, no safety net, no other job prospects that would pay enough for her to afford her own apartment and support herself. If she complained, if she made waves, she could lose everything. She had seen it happen before, back in Kyiv. Women who spoke up against powerful men and found themselves blacklisted, unemployed, blamed for inviting the attention. She had been warned by other immigrant friends that America was different on paper, but in practice, men with money and power still made the rules. So she stayed quiet. She endured. She hoped it would stop. It didn't stop. It escalated. The gifts became more expensive. A Tiffany bracelet that appeared on her desk with a note saying it reminded him of her elegance. She tried to return it, but he insisted it was a company gift for her excellent work. Designer perfume, a cashmere scarf. Each gift felt like a chain, binding her to his expectations. The messages came more frequently. Text messages at 10, 11 at night. Not about work, about how she looked that day. About how lucky the company was to have someone so beautiful and intelligent. About how he couldn't stop thinking about her. She stopped responding to the late-night messages. He started calling instead. One night, he showed up at the diner where she worked her second job. He sat at the counter for 2 hours, watching her serve customers, smiling at her whenever their eyes met. When her shift ended, he offered to drive her home. She lied and said her boyfriend was picking her up. He knew she was lying. He told her she didn't need to be afraid of him, that he just wanted to take care of her. The fear became constant. She started having panic attacks in the bathroom at work. She stopped sleeping well, always alert for the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. She felt his eyes on her constantly, tracking her movements, possessive and hungry. She wanted to tell someone, but who? I was his wife. Human Resources reported to the executive board, which was controlled by Daniel and me. Her friends in the Ukrainian community told her to keep her head down, not to risk her visa status. Everyone she talked to gave her the same advice. Endure it. Men like him always move on eventually. Just wait it out.
but it kept getting worse. 2 months ago, he invited her to a business dinner, told her it was with clients, that he needed her there to take notes. She agreed. It seemed legitimate. When she arrived at the restaurant, a private room at Lula Bernardine, there were no clients, just Daniel, a table for two, and a bottle of wine that cost more than her monthly rent. He told her to sit down. She remained standing. He asked why she was always so tense around him, why she couldn't just relax and let him show her how good life could be if she were smart about it. He talked about how he could help her get a green card, how he knew immigration lawyers, how he could make her life so much easier. She left without sitting down. She took the subway home and cried the entire way. The next day at work, he acted like nothing had happened, but his eyes followed her with a new intensity.
The looks became more brazen. He started making comments within earshot of other employees about how beautiful she was, disguising them as jokes. The other staff laughed uncomfortably. Nobody said anything. She started looking for other jobs, but every application required references. Daniel would be her reference. She was trapped in a cage made of visa requirements, financial desperation, and professional dependency. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon 6 weeks ago. I had left for an early meeting with our investors in Midtown. Irina was alone in the office suite, organizing files in the conference room. Daniel came in and closed the door behind him. He sat on the edge of the conference table, too close to where she was standing. He told her they needed to talk, that he was tired of playing games, that he knew she felt the attraction too, that he could see it in the way she looked at him. She told him she didn't know what he was talking about. She tried to leave. He blocked the door. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't touch her, but his presence, his size, his power in that moment was enough. He told her he was a patient man, but his patience had limits, that he had been generous with her, given her opportunities, treated her well, that it was time for her to show some appreciation. She asked what he wanted. The words came out as a whisper, barely audible. He smiled. He told her he wanted one night. Just one night with her, somewhere private, somewhere they wouldn't be interrupted. After that, if she wanted to keep things professional, fine. But he needed to know what it would be like. He had been fantasizing about her for months, and he needed to get her out of his system. She felt the room spinning. She managed to ask what would happen if she said no. He shrugged and told her that would be disappointing, that he would have to reconsider whether she was really the right fit for the company, that he would hate to have to let her go, especially knowing how difficult it would be for her to find another job, especially with visa complications. It wasn't a threat, not explicitly, but they both understood what he was saying. She told him she needed time to think. He gave her a week. She left work early that day, claiming she was sick. She was sick. Sick with fear, with rage, with shame, with desperation. For 5 days, she barely ate. She researched immigration lawyers she couldn't afford. She looked at job postings in other states, knowing she had no money to relocate. She considered going back to Ukraine, but there was nothing there for her anymore. The war had taken everything. She had never felt so alone in her entire life. On the 5th day, she made a decision. She was going to tell me, even if it meant losing her job. Even if it meant I didn't believe her. Even if it meant risking everything. She couldn't carry this alone anymore. That evening, after everyone else had left the office, she knocked on my door. I was reviewing quarterly reports, frustrated about some discrepancies in our spending that Daniel had approved without my input. I looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, and immediately knew something was wrong. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. She asked if she could talk to me about something personal, something serious. I closed my laptop and told her to sit down. She sat in the chair across from my desk, and for a long moment she just stared at her hands. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were filled with tears. She started talking. The words came out in the rush, like a dam breaking. She told me everything. The months of inappropriate attention, the gifts she didn't want, the late-night messages, the dinner that wasn't a business meeting, the conversation in the conference room, the ultimatum. She cried as she spoke, apologizing over and over, apologizing for not telling me sooner, apologizing for being in this situation, apologizing for existing in a way that had attracted his attention. I sat there, frozen, as her words washed over me. Every sentence was a confirmation of what I had suspected. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle I had been trying to solve. Every moment she described was a moment of my own humiliation, my own blindness. But more than anything, I felt rage. Not at her, at him. At the man who had gaslit me for years. At the man who had made me feel crazy for trusting my instincts. At the man who was using his power to corner a vulnerable woman who had done nothing wrong except be beautiful and need a job. I reached across the desk and took her hands. They were ice cold. I told her to stop apologizing, that none of this was her fault, that I believed her, that I believed every word. The relief on her face was heartbreaking. She had been so afraid I would take his side, so afraid I would fire her, so afraid I would blame her. I told her about the incident 3 years ago, about Rebecca, about the text messages, about how Daniel had convinced me I was paranoid, how he had made me question my own sanity, about the therapy that had been designed to make me doubt myself, about the wound that had never healed. We sat there together, two women who had been victimized by the same man in different ways. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. For the first time in years, I felt validated. Irina's phone buzzed on the desk between us. She glanced at the screen and her face went white. She turned the phone toward me with a trembling hand. The message was from Daniel. "I'm done playing games, Irina. Name your price. 1 night with me, anything you want. I always get what I pay for." I stared at those words, read them 3 times, let them sink in. He thought she had a price. He thought everyone had a price. He thought his money could buy anything: loyalty, silence, bodies, souls. Something inside me shifted. The hurt transformed into something clearer, sharper. This wasn't just about catching him in an affair. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice, about taking back the power he had stolen from both of us. I looked up at Irina, asked her if she trusted me, if she was brave enough to help me set a trap. She nodded. Her tears had stopped. In her eyes, I saw the same determination I felt. We spent the next 2 hours planning, every detail, every contingency. We were going to give Daniel exactly what he wanted, and it was going to destroy him. Irina picked up her phone. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice was steady as she typed. $100,000, 1 night, the Plaza Hotel, Friday at 9 p.m. Take it or leave it. We waited. The 3 dots appeared immediately, showing he was typing. The response came within 2 minutes. Done. I'll transfer half tomorrow as good faith, the rest after. He was so confident, so certain of his victory. He had no idea he was walking into checkmate. The next morning, $50,000 appeared in Irina's bank account. Wire transfer from a corporate account he controlled, one I didn't have access to. He was using company money to pay for sex. Perfect. Over the next week, Irina kept up the pretense. She responded to his messages with just enough enthusiasm to keep him hooked. She confirmed the hotel room reservation. She asked for the remaining $50,000 to be transferred the day before their meeting, claiming she needed to know he was serious. He transferred it Thursday afternoon. $100,000,
all documented, all traceable. Friday arrived, and I woke up with a strange sense of calm, the kind of calm that comes after a storm, when you've already made your decision and there's no turning back. I had barely slept the night before, running through every possible scenario in my mind. What if he didn't show up? What if he suspected something? What if the video didn't capture everything clearly? But more than the fear, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. For once, I wasn't reacting to Daniel's choices. I wasn't trying to prove I wasn't crazy. I wasn't begging to be believed. I was setting the terms. I was writing the ending. I got dressed for work that morning in a navy pantsuit, the same professional armor I wore to every board meeting. Daniel was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, drinking his espresso and scrolling through emails on his iPad. He didn't look up when I entered. We had perfected this dance of polite distance, moving around each other like strangers sharing space. I poured myself coffee and watched him. Really watched him. The sharp line of his jaw, the expensive watch on his wrist that I had given him for our 5th anniversary, the gray starting to show at his temples that made him look distinguished rather than old. He was handsome, successful, charming when he wanted to be. He was also a predator, a liar, a man who believed his money made him untouchable.
Not anymore. At the office, Irina and I barely spoke. We couldn't risk anyone noticing unusual behavior between us. She sent me a single text message at 11 a.m. I'm terrified. I responded with 3 words. Me too. Tonight. The day dragged on endlessly. Every meeting felt like it lasted hours. Every email seemed irrelevant. I kept checking the clock, watching the minutes tick by with agonizing slowness. At 3 p.m., I had a conference call with investors that I could barely focus on. At 4:30, I reviewed contracts that I had to read 3 times because the words weren't sinking in. Irina left the office at 5 p.m. sharp. I watched her gather her things, her movements careful and controlled. She didn't look at me as she walked past my office, but I saw her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. I stayed until 6:30, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. When I finally closed my laptop and stood up to leave, my legs felt weak. This was really happening. In less than 3 hours, everything would change. The drive home to Connecticut took 45 minutes, but it felt like seconds. My mind was racing through the plan over and over. Every detail had to be perfect. One mistake, one slip, and Daniel would find a way to turn this around, to make himself the victim, to convince everyone that I was the unstable one. I pulled into our driveway at 7:20. Daniel's Porsche was already there, parked in its usual spot. The house looked beautiful in the early evening light, the gardens perfectly manicured, the windows glowing, warm and inviting. It looked like a home. It had never really felt like one. Inside, I found Daniel in his study, sitting behind the mahogany desk, reviewing something on his laptop. He looked relaxed, confident. Why wouldn't he be? He thought he had won. He thought that in less than 2 hours, he would be at the plaza with Irina, finally getting what he wanted. I stood in the doorway and delivered my rehearsed lines with perfect casualness. I told him I was meeting my college friend Jennifer for dinner in the city, that we were going to that new Italian place in Tribeca she'd been wanting to try, that it would probably run late, so I'd just stay at our apartment in Manhattan rather than drive back to Connecticut. He barely looked up from his laptop. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen as he responded that it was fine, but he had some work to catch up on anyway, that he might turn in early. The lies came so easily to him, so smoothly, like he had done this 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. I went upstairs to our bedroom and packed an overnight bag, moving mechanically through the motions. Pajamas I wouldn't wear, a change of clothes for tomorrow, toiletries. I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself. My face looked drawn, older than my 36 years. There were lines around my eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. Stress lines, worry lines.
Lines carved by loving a man who was incapable of loving me back. After tonight, I would never have to see that expression on my face again. I changed out of my work clothes into jeans and a cashmere sweater, something casual and comfortable, something that said I was really going to dinner with a friend. I reapplied my makeup, making sure I looked put together but not suspicious. Normal. Just another Friday night. Before I left, I stopped by Daniel's study one more time. He was still at his desk, but now he was on his phone, texting someone. Probably Irina, confirming details, probably counting down the minutes just like I was, but for very different reasons. I told him I was heading out. He looked up and smiled at me, that charming smile that used to make my heart race. Now, it just made my stomach turn. He told me to have fun, to say hi to Jennifer for him, to drive safe. The concern in his voice sounded so genuine. He was such a good actor. So was I. I kissed him on the cheek, a gesture so routine it meant nothing, but also everything. It was the last time I would ever touch him as his wife, the last moment before everything shattered. He smelled like his expensive cologne, the same scent that would be all over that hotel room in a few hours. I walked out of that study, out of that house, and I didn't look back.
The drive back to Manhattan was a blur. I took the Hutchinson River Parkway, barely aware of the other cars around me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I had to consciously remind myself to breathe, to focus on the road, to not let my mind spiral into all the things that could go wrong. I arrived at the plaza at 8:15 p.m., 15 minutes early. I parked in the underground garage and sat in my car for a moment, engine off, listening to the silence. This was it, the point of no return. I pulled out my phone and sent Irina a text. "I'm here. Are you ready?" Her response came immediately. "Room 512. I'm here. Scared, but ready." I took the elevator up from the garage, my heart pounding harder with each floor. The hotel lobby was busy with Friday night energy, couples dressed for dinner, families checking in, business people having drinks at the bar. Normal people doing normal things, completely unaware that upstairs, in room 512, justice was about to be served. I took a different elevator up to the 5th floor, keeping my head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The hallway was quiet, carpeted in plush burgundy, lit by elegant sconces that cast warm lights on the cream-colored walls. I found room 512 and knocked softly, 3 quick taps. Irina opened the door immediately. She had changed out of her work clothes into a black cocktail dress, elegant but not provocative, with a modest neckline and hem that fell just above her knees. Her blonde hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She wore minimal makeup, just enough to look polished. She looked beautiful. She also looked absolutely terrified. We stepped inside and she closed the door behind me, engaging the deadbolt. For a moment, we just stood there, looking at each other. 2 women about to take down a man who had hurt both of us in different ways. I pulled her into a hug. She was shaking. "We can still call this off," I whispered. "If you're not comfortable, we don't have to do this." She pulled back and shook her head firmly. "No, we're doing this. He needs to face consequences. I need him to face consequences." I nodded. "Okay, let's go over the plan one more time." The suite was exactly as described in the reservation confirmation I had hacked from Daniel's email. A sitting area with a sofa and 2 armchairs arranged around a coffee table. A king-size bed with pristine white linens. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of Central Park. The trees below lit by street lamps. The city glittering beyond. A marble bathroom with a soaking tub. Everything luxurious, expensive, designed for romance. We spent the next 20 minutes staging the room. Irina stood in different positions while I tested various spots for myself, trying to find the perfect angle. The corner sofa was ideal, partially shadowed by a large potted plant, positioned so that I would be behind Daniel when he entered, with the clear view of both the door and wherever Irina would be standing. I sat down and pulled out my phone, opening the camera app and switching to video mode. I did several test recordings, checking the angle, the lighting, the sound quality. The acoustics were good. The room was quiet enough that voices would carry clearly. Stand by the window, I instructed Irina. She moved into position, silhouetted against the view of the park. Perfect. That's where you'll be when he walks in. You'll be the first thing he sees. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking small despite her height. What if he tries to touch me? What if he won't get the chance? I interrupted. The second he says anything incriminating, I'm revealing myself. You won't be alone with him for more than a minute. I promise. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This wasn't planning and plotting. This was real. In less than 30 minutes, Daniel would walk through that door expecting to claim his prize. Instead, he was going to lose everything. I stood up and went to her, taking both her hands in mine. They were ice cold. Irina, look at me. You are so brave. What you're doing right now, standing up to someone who has power over your entire life, your visa, your job, your stability, that takes incredible courage. You're not a victim, you're a warrior. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. I just keep thinking about what he said, that everyone has a price, that he knew I would be smart about this. He underestimated you, I said firmly. He underestimated both of us. That's going to be his downfall. She took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. Okay, I'm ready. Let's destroy him. We took our positions. Irina by the window, adjusting her dress, smoothing her hair. Me on the corner sofa, phone in hand, testing the recording one more time. I turned off all the lights except a single lamp near the bed, creating the intimate ambiance Daniel would expect, while leaving enough illumination for the camera to capture everything clearly. The waiting was the hardest part. Time seemed to slow down, each minute stretching into an eternity. I could hear every sound in that room. Irina's breathing, rapid and shallow, the hum of the air conditioning, the muffled sound of traffic from the street below, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. At 8:50 p.m., Irina's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. It's him. He's in the lobby. He'll be here in 5 minutes. My stomach dropped. This was real. This was happening. Remember, I said quietly, you don't have to say much. Just let him talk. Men like him love to hear themselves speak. They love to explain, to justify, to convince you that what they're doing is perfectly reasonable. She nodded, her jaw set with determination, despite the fear in her eyes. We fell silent. The room felt charged with tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. Every second that passed felt loaded with significance. I could hear Irina shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. At 8:58 a.m., I pressed record on my phone. The red light appeared on the screen, small but significant. Everything that happened from this moment forward would be documented, preserved, undeniable. At 9 p.m. exactly, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Expensive shoes on carpet, confident strides. They stopped outside our door. Irina and I locked eyes across the room. This was it. The key card slid into the lock. The electronic beep sounded. The handle turned. At 9:02 p.m., we heard the key card in the lock. The door opened. Daniel stepped inside, his back to me, completely unaware of my presence. He was wearing the navy Tom Ford suit, the one I had bought him. His hair was freshly cut. He smelled of the expensive cologne he saved for special occasions. He closed the door behind him and smiled at Irina. That smile made my stomach turn. It was predatory, triumphant, entitled. I pressed record. His first words were exactly what I needed. See, I knew you'd be smart about this. Every woman has a price. Some just make you work harder to find it. He walked toward her, confident, relaxed. 100,000 for one night. That's more than you'd make in 2 years at the company. You're a smart girl, Irina, smarter than most. Irina stood frozen by the window. To her credit, she didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on him. He continued talking, unable to help himself, needing to justify his actions, to frame them as generosity rather than coercion. My wife has no idea where I am right now. She's having dinner with some boring friend from college, probably talking about yoga or charity galas or whatever it is rich women talk about when they're not spending their husband's money. The casual cruelty in his voice when he spoke about me. Like I was an inconvenience. A joke. Layla's beautiful, don't get me wrong, he said, loosening his tie. But she's cold. Frigid, really. Everything with her is about control, about the company, about her dead father's legacy. You're different. You understand what it means to appreciate someone who can take care of you. He was getting closer to Irina now. She took a small step back. He noticed and laughed. Don't be nervous. This is just business, right? A transaction. You give me what I want. I give you financial security. Hell, this could be the beginning of a beautiful arrangement. Imagine if you played your cards right. I could set you up in a nice apartment, take care of your visa situation, maybe even give you a promotion. All you have to do is be smart about it. He reached out to touch her face. That's when I stood up. The movement caught his eye. He turned, and I watched his face transform in real time. Confusion, recognition, shock, fear. The color drained from his skin. His hand, still extended toward Irina, dropped to his side. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I held up my phone, making sure he could see the red recording light. My voice was steady, calm, cold. Keep talking, Daniel, please. You were saying something about how I'm frigid and how you could set up your employee in an apartment in exchange for sex. I want to make sure I get all of this on video. He tried to speak, stammered something about how this wasn't what it looked like, how he could explain. I laughed, actually laughed. The sound surprised even me. You can explain how you transferred $100,000 of company money to your secretary for a night at the Plaza Hotel? Please, I'm dying to hear that explanation. He turned to Irina, and I saw rage flash across his face. You set me up, he hissed. You fucking set me up. No, I said, my voice sharp enough to cut. You set yourself up. She came to me because you gave her an ultimatum. Sleep with you or lose her job. Did you really think that was okay? Did you really think you could use your power over someone's visa status, someone's financial desperation to coerce them into bed? I never said, he started. You're on camera saying all of it. Talking about how everyone has a price, how I'm a boring, frigid wife, how you could give Irina a better life if she's smart enough to fuck you. Your words, Daniel, not mine. He looked around the room like a trapped animal, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Layla, please, we can talk about this. Don't do anything rash. Think about the company. Think about your reputation. My reputation? I stepped closer to him. You mean the reputation I've had to rebuild twice because of your affairs? The reputation you destroyed when you convinced me and a therapist that I was paranoid and crazy. That reputation? That was different. It was Rebecca 3 years ago. It's Irina now. How many others were there in between? How many other women did you corner? How many other people's desperation did you exploit? He had no answer, just stood there, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume, his confidence evaporating. I pulled out my phone, the second phone I'd brought with me, and showed him the screen. Bank records, wire transfer receipts, months of text messages Irina had saved, emails sent at inappropriate hours. The paper trail was comprehensive. I'm filing for divorce, I said, and I'm removing you as CEO of Morrison Tech Solutions, effective immediately.
"You can't do that," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can. You seem to have forgotten the terms of our prenuptial agreement, the one you insisted we sign, the one written by your lawyer. Remember the infidelity clause? Any proof of an affair gives the faithful spouse full control of all marital assets and company shares." I watched him realize what that meant. The company was mine. The house was mine. The cars, the bank accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it reverted to me. He would get nothing. "You're also going to resign from the board," I continued. "You're going to issue a public statement citing personal reasons. You're going to accept a buyout of your company shares at current market value, which we both know you can't afford to pay me back, so you'll settle for whatever I offer. Or I release this video to the board, to the investors, and to every tech publication in the country. Your choice." His face was red now, veins bulging in his neck. "You've vindictive itch. Your father would be ashamed of you." "My father would be ashamed of the man he trusted with his company," I shot back. "The man who used company funds to pay for sex. The man who sexually harassed his employees. My father built Morrison Tech on integrity. You've been destroying his legacy piece by piece." He looked at Irina one more time. "And you? What do you get out of this?" Irina spoke for the first time since he'd entered the room. Her voice was quiet, but firm. "My dignity. And my job. Layla is keeping me on as Director of Human Resources. I'm going to make sure what you did to me never happens to anyone else in that company." The defeat in his eyes was almost satisfying. Almost. "Get out," I said. "Go back to Connecticut tonight. Pack your things. You have until Sunday to move out. After that, the locks will be changed." He left without another word. The door closing behind him sounded like the end of a chapter. Irina and I stood in that hotel room for a long moment, neither of us speaking. Then she started crying, not sad tears, but tears of relief, of release. I held her while she shook, this brave woman who had risked everything to help me, who had been cornered and terrorized and had still found the courage to fight back. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind. Daniel tried to fight the divorce, but the evidence was overwhelming. His lawyer took one look at the video, the bank transfers, and the prenup and advised him to settle. He tried to claim the wire transfers were company expenses, but that only made things worse when the board launched an investigation into his financial management. The buyout negotiation was brutal. He wanted $2 million for his shares. I offered $300,000, a fraction of what the company was worth, but more than he deserved. He had no choice but to accept. Without the shares, without his position, he had no leverage. The board meeting where he resigned was the most satisfying hour of my professional life. I presented the evidence in a closed session with our attorneys present. The board members, people who had known my father, who had watched me grow up in this industry, looked at Daniel with disgust. They voted unanimously to accept his resignation and to install me as CEO. Irina sat beside me during that meeting. When I announced her promotion to Director of Human Resources, several board members nodded in approval. She had already started working on new company policies, mandatory sexual harassment training, anonymous reporting systems, third-party investigation procedures. She was turning her trauma into protection for others. The divorce was finalized 4 weeks later. Daniel didn't even show up to the final hearing. His lawyer signed the papers on his behalf. I walked out of that courthouse as a single woman, free from a marriage that had been suffocating me for years. Daniel moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Last I heard, he was working as a senior developer for one of our competitors, a significant step down from CEO. He had to sell his Porsche to make rent. The Hamptons house was mine. The Connecticut estate was mine. The life he had built on my father's company was gone. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, but also lighter, like I had been carrying weight for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. 3 months after the divorce, I was sitting in my office, the corner office that used to be my father's, the one Daniel had occupied for the past 4 years, when Irina knocked on my door. She was holding a folder.
"The new HR policies are ready for your approval," she said, setting the folder on my desk. I flipped through them. Comprehensive, thoughtful, strong. "These are perfect," I told her. She smiled. "I wanted to make sure no one else has to go through what we did." "We did good," I said. "Both of us." "We did," she agreed. Then she paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you believe me when I came to your office that night? You could have taken his side. You could have fired me. Why didn't you?" I thought about that question, about all the years of doubting myself, about the therapist who convinced me I was paranoid, about the loneliness of suspecting and not knowing. "Because I knew what it felt like to not be believed," I said finally, "and I wasn't going to do that to someone else, especially not someone who had the courage to tell the truth." She nodded, tears in her eyes again. "Thank you for everything." "Thank you," I said, "for being brave enough to come forward, for helping me see clearly, for trusting me." She left, and I sat alone in my office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. My father had built this company from nothing. He had believed in integrity, in treating people with respect, in building something that mattered. Daniel had nearly destroyed all of that with his arrogance and his entitlement, but it was still standing. Morrison Tech was still here, and now it was being run the way my father would have wanted, with honor, with fairness, with protection for the people who worked here. I thought about Daniel sometimes, about how he had truly believed that money could buy anything: loyalty, silence, bodies, love. He had been so confident in his power, so certain that the world operated on transactions where everyone had a price. He was wrong. Some things can't be bought: dignity, self-respect, justice, the bonds between women who refused to be victims. Daniel had money, he had charm, he had power, but in the end he underestimated two women who had something stronger than any of that. We had each other, we had truth, we had courage, and that was priceless. Irina still works for me. She's become one of my closest friends and my most trusted advisor. We have coffee every morning before the office gets busy. We talk about work, about life, about her girlfriend she met at a tech networking event last month. She's thriving now, confident, settled, building a life she chose rather than one forced on her by circumstance. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that hotel room, about sitting in the shadows with my phone recording, about the moment Daniel walked in, so sure of himself, so convinced he had won. I think about how close I came to dismissing my instincts, how easily I could have convinced myself I was being paranoid again. How different things would be if Irina hadn't been brave enough to tell me the truth. We saved each other that night. She gave me validation. I gave her protection. Together, we took down a man who thought he was untouchable. The universe has a way of balancing the scales. It might take time. It might require courage. It might demand that we stand up when every instinct tells us to stay quiet. But justice comes. Sometimes it needs a push. Sometimes it needs two women who refuse to stay silent. Sometimes it needs a trap set in a hotel room at the plaza. Daniel thought he could buy anything for the right price. Instead, he paid everything for one night he never got. And that was exactly what he deserved. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.